Now joining me is Labor MP Josh Burns. Josh Burns, thanks for your time. I wanted to start with this critique by the former Liberal Treasurer Josh Frydenberg of the government and its approach on the Middle East. Frydenberg is saying, quote, on the very same day of the October 7 attack, with the blood of the innocent victims not even dry, Foreign Minister Penny Wong was calling for Israel's restraint. Since then, she's led pious calls for a ceasefire, which in the absence of Hamas's defeat would only lead them to regroup and, in their own words, go again. Does he have a point?
Well, good morning, Andrew, and let me make a couple of points. First of all, October 7 is, it's a devastating day that's coming up, and I'm still a bit shaken by it all. I went to Israel last year. I went to the kibbutz in the south, and I went to Sderot, and I met with the survivors of the Nova Music Festival. I saw firsthand the devastation and the destruction, both the physical and emotional and psychological trauma that was inflicted upon a people. And this is not the time for political points. This is the time for people to recognise the real devastation that has occurred on this day, as well as the real consequences that the world and the Middle East are facing right now. It's been a terrible year, and I'm not interested in using October 7 to make some sort of partisan comment.
All right, that's fair enough. Let me ask you about this though. The lawyer Mark Liebler, he's not a politician or wasn't one. He supported Anthony Albanese over the Yes campaign. He said in the Australian yesterday that the actions of the government have been, quote, at best confused and at worst driven by domestic political considerations. As a Labor MP from a Jewish background, do you think Anthony Albanese and Penny Wong have been as strong in their advocacy for the Israeli cause during this war as they could or should have been?
Well, first of all, Mark's someone I know very well, and I admire him greatly, and he's made a huge contribution to Australia as someone not only who has invested so much of his time and efforts into the Melbourne Jewish community, but also the broader Australian community through his works around reconciliation, and his firm has made a huge contribution to Melbourne and Australia. So Mark's someone I have a lot of time with, a lot of time for. Personally, my job is to represent the people I do and the people of Macnamara, and I'll continue to be a strong voice for them. It's up to people to make their own judgments about how politics and politicians play out. But certainly in my experience, Anthony Albanese has been someone who I have worked closely with on these matters, and he has been someone who I know cares deeply about the Jewish community, as does the Foreign Minister, and they have done everything that they thought was appropriate to try and assist the Jewish community. I'm going with the Prime Minister on Monday night to be with our community and to mark the terrible events of October 7. And I'll continue to advocate for the people that I'm privileged to represent.
The Greens are your traditional rival in the marginal seat that you have of Macnamara. What have you made of their stance on the war?
Well, the Greens are my only rival in Macnamara. It really is just a contest between me and them. And frankly, I've been just blown away at how abhorrent the Greens have been throughout this period. Their positions on conflict is one thing, and they're entitled to that, but the way in which they have actively tried to demonise the Jewish community, obviously Jenny Leong's comments about how the Jewish community have tentacles is the worst and most blatantly anti-Semitic one, but also the Deputy Leader, Marine Faruqi, has been completely unable to recognise the anti-Semitism that is real and exists in Australia, and demonise the experience or to minimise the experience of university students has been just so disheartening, and it's hardly surprising that there's no Jews left in the Greens, basically. That they've all deserted them. Adam Band has basically run a party that has ostracised and made the Jewish people that were supporters of them, who campaigned against me, feel completely uncomfortable. So it's a great stain on Adam Band's legacy, the way in which the Greens have managed this conflict, not with maturity and with sophistication and with a sense of unity, but rather to try and, they've clearly been willing to throw the Jewish community under the bus.
What do you think of the attitude of some of these pro-Palestine protesters holding vigils and protests today and tomorrow in the context of the October 7 anniversary?
Look, Andrew, everyone, I listened to James carefully on your previous interview, and there are not mechanisms by which the federal government could intervene here. This is, what happens on our streets is a matter for the states. And to be frank, I support people's right to protest. The right to gather and to associate is a fundamental right in Australia. I'm the chair of the Human Rights Committee, and I believe in that. I would also say that October 7 is a devastating day on the calendar. And for people to gather on that day sends a very terrible message about whether or not people are allowing their fellow Australians to grieve. And we must have the ability for all of us to grieve. I know this is difficult for our Palestinian community, and I know this is, today people of Lebanese descent and Lebanese Australians are looking at pictures feeling just terrible for their family. And I get it. I get it. And we need to have room and space for everyone to come together and to feel the devastation of this conflict that's happening right across the world. So, I don't think that the message of protesting on October 7 does anything else other than really make people who are grieving feel even more upset and more uncomfortable. And I would urge people who are thinking about doing that to maybe consider another option.
You said before that Jewish Australians had given up on the Greens or had left the Greens. There was not a single Jewish Australian now who would support them. But hasn't Labor had the same problem, Josh Burns? Isn't there a perception that the Labor Party has given up on Israel or not supported them to the fullness that they could over the past 12 months? Isn't that a problem for the Labor Party?
Yeah, obviously, Andrew, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's been an extremely difficult period, and this has been a terrible time where people have not only dealt with the really awful conflict that's happened on the other side of the world, but also the rise of anti-Semitism in Australia. And obviously that's going to put strain on the relationship between people and government, because we always need to, in positions of power, do more to protect our people. That's a fact. So I recognise the fact that if people feel like more needs to be done, then that's an entirely legitimate position that people can take and should take if that's how they feel. My job as a Labor member for Macnamara has been to do my best to represent our people. It's meant we've got funding for our community security organisations. It's meant we've been able to introduce and pass legislation that has outlawed a whole range of things and is looking to tackle anti-Semitism online. We've appointed a special envoy into combating anti-Semitism. We are not giving up. We are continuing to work to ensure that Jewish Australians can get back to the multicultural stability and life that they've enjoyed, certainly throughout my entire life prior to this conflict. So, if people are feeling upset, that is okay. And I recognise it, Andrew. But I also would say that the work has not stopped and it will not stop, and we will get through this, and we will continue to stand by all Australians, especially our Jewish Australians as well.
Labor MP Josh Burns, thanks so much for your time.
Thanks, mate.